What makes a good mystery series? Is it a careful command of a wide varied cast? Is it a set of dire consequences should the hero fail to find the truth? Is it a truly mind-boggling mystery full of twists and turns? Most of all, do all of these necessarily need to come together to make a mystery worth reading about? Is it completely ruined otherwise, or is it still salvageable? Only one way to find out. The Japanese government, in order to save the educational system from collapse, creates a new system whereby the students would act as jury, prosecution and defence to solve disputes in their own classroom arbitration sessions. At Tenbin Elementary School, the new transfer student Abaku Inagami arrives, a whiz-kid prosecutor who, among only two others, survived the tragic mass murder of his class 5 years prior. He is here in hopes of finally unmasking the bloody arbitration sessions perp and bringing the ultimate punishment down upon them. Now, it's impossible to talk about this without first talking about Danganronpa, a murder mystery game series that's recently enjoyed huge international success. When I read the first chapter of School Judgement, I immediately thought to myself, this is a Danganronpa ripoff. And based on that first chapter alone, I wouldn't have been wrong in saying that. Especially considering Abaku Inagami's certifiably cheesy catchphrase, the way his eyes are drawn, and the way his special ability works, practically lifting the BTB concept from Danganronpa and inserting it into a story that didn't need it. Because of all this, it's really difficult to see it as anything more than a pale, toothless cash-in on the game's massive popularity at first. Specifically at Chapter 7, School Judgement manages to break off from what it once was and develop an identity of its own. The case that begins in this chapter is so absurd, so outlandishly metaphorical, and so over the top that it becomes its own thing. From this point onwards, it takes on the identity of this charmingly cartoonish mystery series that becomes likeable because of how absurd it is. It also takes on the form of a cautionary tale at the end, telling readers to forgive grudges of the past and look towards the future. To look at things from every angle imaginable, otherwise you'll never be able to see the full picture. The story is divided into multi-chaptered cases, split into the incident, the investigation, and the court session, wrapping it all up in a nice little bow. As you'd expect from a mystery series, but while it isn't aimed at older audiences, it really is very toothless. Incidents that end up as the focus of each case never come close to murder, and the supposedly harsh punishments are the equivalent of a slap on the wrist. While I appreciate that strong punishments for extreme incidents aren't exactly appropriate for young teenagers, it becomes insulting at times. It wouldn't feel so insulting if it weren't for the serious tone of the arbitration sessions, that end up treating silly pranks or simple playground accidents as if they were mass murders. The mysteries themselves are interesting enough without having to blow it out of proportion, so when the big reveals roll around they come off as flaccid and underwhelming. The reveal itself drains some of the sense out of particular panels and pieces of dialogue, which is really noticeable on a second read through. There's an ongoing background narrative about the bloody session, where Abaku's entire class was slaughtered 5 years ago, and he's come to Tenbin Academy to kill a certain student. As an overarching plot, it's well woven through every case. Every chapter drip feeds Abaku, and by extension the reader, information about exactly what happened that day, why and who may be responsible for it. When the ending rolls around though, everything comes full circle with everyone laying all their cards on the table and the full truth of the incident revealed. Although it does rely on a Deus Ex Machina to get there, and honestly it didn't move me much. I thought that we'd be in for another case, the biggest case yet, after the real final case, that was particularly underwhelming. It did bring every piece onto the board, but I thought that it was for a climactic courtroom showdown, and not the outpouring of information that we got to just explain everything. Although the big reveal was a great one that I never saw coming, and the ending itself was very well written, with everyone finding the strength to move forward instead of looking back on their dark past. A mixed bag certainly. Nothing spectacular or emotionally moving, but solemnly satisfying instead, which I suppose I just never anticipated considering how overblown the rest of the series is. First I'll talk about Abaku, the new kid in town. He's a pro, self-taught attorney with the ability to rompa the opponent into submission and render their arguments useless. This sounds pretty overpowered for a courtroom manga, and I guess the writer, Nobuaki Inoki, thought so too. Because by the second volume this ability, as well as the unforgivably cheesy catchphrase that comes with it, has vanished from the narrative without a trace. Inconsistency is usually a bad thing in fiction, but I can't complain when it's used to bury the really bad things. In terms of personality, Abaku is just as childish as you'd expect someone his age to be, but combining that with an analytic thought process and a relentless urge for the truth, and you get a pretty fun character. Half the time you'd swear he sees the cases he takes on like they're a game, because he just revels in them. He's at his best when tackling a case, and as the manga's problem solver, he likes to lead the reader on, but only reveals the truth of a case at the critical moment. A good protagonist overall, even if it's predictable that he will always come out on top. Tento Nanahoshi is Abaku's sidekick, the first accused that he comes to the aid of upon transferring to Tenbin Academy. He's a hapless assistant who acts as our window into exactly what's going on. A character who exists solely for the purpose of having exposition given to him is never a bad thing. Because Abaku has to fill Tento in all the time, it means that he's also filling us in. But Abaku never spills all his beans at once, meaning that he only lets on as much as he'd ever let any spectator know. Tento is a good-natured boy who hates conflict and just wants everyone to get along. He's a very welcome member of what is a truly gigantic cast for a 3-volume series. Sarutobi and Yuri are blasts from Abaku's past. Top-notch attorneys with abilities of their own who come to Tenbin Academy to thwart Abaku and as the only other survivors of the bloody session to find the perpetrator of the tragedy in their own way. Sarutobi represents a strong rival for Abaku when he's introduced, and it's a welcome threat. We become unsure if he can beat Sarutobi, and considering Abaku's track record, that's quite an impression. He joins the regular cast afterward as a very capable assistant and friend to Abaku, who works behind the scenes. He's a great inclusion to the cast with a presence that matches Abaku's. Yuri, on the other hand, isn't so great. She's a sadist with an unbridled determination to catch the perpetrator of the bloody session, who is willing to torture suspects to get the confession she wants. I think the problem is that she's only introduced in the build-up towards the climax, and because of that she never gets any of the time that Sarutobi did to fit into the cast. Her friendship with Abaku is never established, but the story treats them as the best of friends, and because of this we just never end up caring about her as much as we're told to. Her flawed method also makes it obvious that she won't beat Abaku either, so in the end she's an inconsequential character, which is a shame since she really had potential, and while most of the other characters in School Judgement aren't fully developed, they at least had their part to play in the mysteries, which made up for that. While Yuri is portrayed as just a bully, which immediately puts her on the reader's blacklist. The supporting cast is gigantic, to accommodate the number of viable suspects for each case. There's Pine, a fellow transfer attorney who considers Abaku her rival and her intimidating father Raichi, the homeroom teacher Akane, the pretty idol Airi, our friend Kuniko, the sporty Ozumi, the class stickler Higashide, the nerdy girls Asa and Nakayama, the gentle Shiratori, the emaciated Tanaka, the allergic Kuroda, the competing artists Vin and Hikari, and finally the athletic Yamada, among others. They are a great mix of fun characters who do a good job of mixing things up, and are all cartoonish enough to be immediately endearing. The cases themselves give relatively good development for each character. Maybe not enough to make most of them highly memorable, but enough so that we understand their motivations. There isn't a specific one that stands out among the rest, for better or for worse. This is Takeshi Obata, one of the most legendary artists in Jump's history, responsible for the artwork of Hikaru no Go, Death Note and Bakuman. At this point I don't need to tell you whether he did a good job or not, because it's already obvious that he's done an amazing job with School Judgement, like the rest of his works. So instead, I'll talk about what he did with the artwork. Instead of using a dark, realistic art style like he did in Death Note, he employs a particularly absurdist one, going with big eyes and exaggerated features, mostly cartoonish and occasionally scary, but also packing it with detail and having worked with Nobuaki Inoki, making sure that everything lends itself to the plot. With only a few specific points to pay close attention to per chapter, this is Obata Unleashed, free to work with the storyboards and able to freely exercise his talent. Although he might be partially responsible for the needless intensity of each case, it's the dramatic nature of his artwork that keeps you engrossed. School Judgement is, above all, a flawed manga. It was often underwhelming, and its ending had a lack of impact that matched the consequences of its courtroom sessions. It should frustrate me beyond all measure, but instead it makes me sad. Sad that I didn't get to spend any more time with these characters, enraptured by Takeshi Obata's magnificent artwork, and engrossed in the ongoing mystery of the bloody classroom session. In the end, I can confidently say that it made me sad because what I wanted was to keep on reading. The series had so much potential for even more high tension cases and even more weird and wonderful characters. Yes, I do think you should read School Judgement. Although it's a short read, despite its glaring flaws, I savoured every page. All 3 volumes of School Judgement are available in English from Viz Media. They are also available digitally via Amazon's Kindle app. If you love a good mystery, then I'd recommend Higurashi When They Cry. Although it isn't courtroom based, it does contain a ton of mysteries that are solved gradually over the course of a dizzying 25 volumes. Even if you're not into mystery, it's a hell of a lot less toothless than School Judgement was. Or if you want to see more of Takeshi Obata's artwork, then I'd recommend Death Note. It's a wordy crime thriller where Obata made a name for himself through a brooding, gothic style that really lends itself to the tone of the series. Hopefully one of these will be to your liking. Remember to leave your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, cheerio.